Hello and welcome to Linux GUI Applications on Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL or WSL2. Quick agenda, we're going to do an introduction to WSL, talk about setting up and configuring different Linux distribution options, then look at deploying and debugging applications. Also cover some troubleshooting, advanced options, and have a little fun at the same time. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Jim McKeith. I'm the Chief Developer Advocate and Engineer for Embarcadero Technologies. A little bit more about me there on the slide, if just in case you're curious. So Windows Subsystem for Linux was introduced in Windows 10. Interesting trivia, it did replace the Windows Subsystem for Unix, or Windows Services for Unix, which was back from 2004. I used to work at a company and had an HPUX HP Unix computer, and it had HPUX had the Internet Explorer for Unix on it, and my Unix computer or my Windows computer had Windows Subsystem for Unix on it, or Windows Services for Unix on it, so it could run both at the same time. I had both computers sitting next to each other. It's pretty crazy. Didn't Just in case you didn't know, that used to be a lot more interoperability back in the day. So Windows Subsystem for Linux is also available on Windows 11 and Windows Server 2019. It was developed in collaboration with Canonical as well as some other Linux notable Linux people. WSL2 improves the performance and actually has a real Linux kernel. The previous one had a fake Linux kernel. It's kind of like an inverse of Wine, if you will. It uses a subset of Hyper-V, so it's not a full virtual machine, but it does have some virtualization technology. As such, it's not as isolated as a full virtual machine, and also has better performance with less overhead from a full virtual machine. WSL-G is what adds GUI support. It ships in Windows 11, but it's also available on Windows 10, I believe still as a preview. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. What in the world? Microsoft and Linux? So if I went and found some quotes by various luminaries in the field. Linus Torvalds, he says it used to be fun to joke about anti-Microsoft stuff with Microsoft versus Linux, but anymore, the Microsoft engineers are just as excited about Linux as any of the Linux engineers he talks to, so it's all good to him. Richard Stallman, on the other hand, still thinks it's a bad idea. He's all about free software, open source, completely open source in his mind. So he sees this as a step backwards. Satya Nadella is famous as talking a few years back saying how Microsoft loves Linux, which WSL is clearly part of that. They've done quite a bit actually to contribute to Linux and work on Linux support in various ways. But then if we look at Mark Shuttleworth, he is the founder and CEO of Canonical. He says it's not like Microsoft is stealing our toys. So Microsoft's not stealing Linux, but instead they're all sharing, getting along, and giving everybody the best possible experience. So your opinion, it's up to you, but that's what the big names in the industry are saying. So why? Benefits and use cases. It gives you the ability to run unmodified ELF64 Linux binaries, and expands your toolkit. It gives you access to everything that's on Linux from Windows. This makes Windows like a really great platform for software development. I think the best platform for software development, because it gives you the ability to have the best of both. You can have all of Linux and all of Windows. Now, yes, you don't have Mac OS on there, but Apple says Mac OS can only be on Apple hardware. Now, we're not going to get into Hackintoshes and stuff like that at this point. So it does have less overhead than a traditional virtual machine. Spins up almost as quick as, or it spins up very quickly, almost immediately. So you don't need any kind of dual booting or third-party virtual machine software, and gives you the ability to test everything. Any of your server deployments, maybe you're deploying to a Linux server, you can now test it right on your Windows computers. Installation, there actually is a few different ways to install it. You can install it via control panel, add, remove Windows features. You can install it with that enable Windows optional features command line there, or you can actually install it with WSL-install. And then once you have it installed, you can launch it a few different ways from Windows Terminal, from the or you can type WSL from a command prompt, or bash, or the name of the distro you want to run. These are some of the distros that do come in the Windows Store. There's actually a few more that aren't listed here, but you can also do third-party distros or distros from other sources, or make your own distros. Note that there are some distros that have multiple versions. If you choose the name without the version, then you get whatever is the current version, and that's will move forward. Or if you pick one with a specific version number, that pins it to a certain version number. Some of these also are paid, where others are free. I've bought the paid ones as well, just because I like variety, but you can certainly choose whichever ones make sense for you. There's a few tools there, the commands there you'd use for managing your distros. List lets you list all the distros, or you can say list running. You can do list online to see the ones that are available from online to be installed. You can change the default distributions. The default distribution is the distribution that runs when you type WSL. You can, if you want to run a specific distribution, then you just type its name, which you got the name from list. You can run as a specific user, run a specific distribution, which you can shorten the -- distribution to -D. And then unregister would let you uninstall the distribution. So if you've installed one that you no longer want to have installed anymore, use unregister. And then lastly, shutdown lets you shut down all the distributions. If you do list -V for verbose, then it will tell you which ones are running, what version of WSL, whether it be WSL 1 or 2. Although at this point, just run WSL 2. It's way better in my opinion. And yeah. For your first run, you will be prompted to enter a username and password. Usually that's just a command line interface, but if you do OpenSUSE, this is the only one I noticed, it actually has this nice ASCII art or ASCII GUI where it pops up and you can tab between the fields and stuff like that. Once you've installed WSL, then connecting from the IDE is pretty straightforward. You are using port or IP address 127.0.0.1. You're using all the same ports. So if you want to have multiple WSL instances running and connect to multiple ones at the same time, then you'll want to assign different port numbers for PA server or whatever, anything else you might be using that might be using in a port. So just be aware of that. If you do forget your password, though, not all is lost. You can switch to the root user, change it to root user, then log in and change the password and change back. So it's just a matter of, you remember what your username is. So in my case, Jim. Then you would do WSL-L to get a list of the distributions. If I was doing Ubuntu, then I would say Ubuntu config default user root. And that would change the default user to root. And then I would run Ubuntu, password Jim is my username, and then change the default password to whatever username I want it, or change it. I'm sorry. I take password Jim and then type the new password I want. Exit WSL, change back to the default user of Jim, and then launch WSL again. And now remember my password this time. Sometimes you want to access the files between the two different systems. So you have Linux files and Windows files. It's fairly easy to do, just a matter of knowing where it's at. From within a Linux distribution, the access to the Windows file system is /mount/C for your C drive or D for your D drive. If you want to jump to it and you're in a Windows terminal, type WSL and it will start up WSL in that current folder. If you're in Linux, or if you're in Windows, want to access your Linux files, if you go to the network shared WSL.localhost, that will give you all of your Linux distros that you have installed with WSL, and you can go into one of them from there. Or if you're in Linux and you want to open up an Explorer window right where you're at, you just type explorer.exe and then put a dot after it. And the dot says open it in the current location. You have to put the .exe or it tries to run Explorer in Linux. So .exe says this is a Windows program and it runs the Windows. If you want to open up a command window or a PowerShell window, you just type command.exe or PowerShell.exe. And now let's have some demonstrations. We'll get started here. Just so everybody can see, I'm running Windows 11 Pro 21H2. This is build 22.00.466. Easiest way I've found is to go into Control Panel and go Windows Features, turn Windows Features on or off, and scroll down here to Windows Subsystem for Linux. There's also a command line way to install it, which I will link to as well, but I will go ahead and show this way for now. It's going to apply changes and requires a restart. There are a few different Linux distros available. I'm going to start with Ubuntu. And I will point out here, while this is installing, that there are a few different Ubuntu options here. There's Ubuntu, and then 20.04 LTS and 18.04 LTS. The difference is this one is whatever the current LTS is, whereas this one these two let you pin it to a specific LTS. So if you want to stay always on 20.04 or always on 18.04, then install one of those. Otherwise, you want to install the one without a version number. I can come here and find Ubuntu there, or I like to do the Windows terminal and add a new Ubuntu one. Because I have this background here, I apparently have to run Ubuntu this way first. Yeah, so this has to run in order to finish installing Ubuntu. So even though I installed it from the store, that has not finished the installation process. So I have to finish running this way first, and then I can go into using here. Okay, new username, we'll say Jim, and my password. There we go. So now I should be able to go back over here, close this, and go new Ubuntu. Ta-da! There we go. So first thing I want to do is sudo apt update. And this will update the package manager lists and then give me the option to upgrade, which will finish installing any updated packages. So sudo apt. While that's running, I'm going to go ahead and install Fedora Remix. I don't remember paying for this one. I may have paid for it. Whitewater Foundry, they also make Penguin, which I knew remember paying for this one. This one's specifically designed for WSL, supposed to have better integration. I don't know. I usually use Ubuntu because that's what I'm familiar with. This is finished. Now, I will point out right here, I'm in Mount C Users Gym. That is my Windows users folder. That's different than here, which is Home Gym. So I have the same username on both Linux and Windows, but the path is different, whether I'm accessing my Windows file system or my Linux file system. Or I'm sorry, my Linux file system or my Windows file system. I have a Linux script, though, that I can use to install all the requirements, prerequisites for development, and I'll go ahead and use that now. You can find this. I'll put a link for it as well for you if you want to go out and look at this, or just run it directly like I do here. Which you should never run a script like that unless you know what the script is doing, but you can take a look at it. It's pretty straightforward. Nothing too hard to understand. All it does is downloads all the updates, which I just did, and then also installs the prerequisite packages as well as the PA server for Delphi. It's all set up and ready to go, so I can just run PA server by typing pa22.sh and set the password. And now I'm ready to go into Delphi and connect to this. So in Rad Studio, I need to go into the Get It Package Manager and install Fmx Linux first. You can do command line Linux without doing this, but if I want to do GUI Linux, I need to install Fmx Linux. So from here, hit install. Restart the IDE. And here are the Fmx Linux samples as well. If you want to take a look at those, those go into some more advanced things you can do with Fmx Linux. So we'll go Tools, Options, Deployment, Connection Manager, and I'll add a new connection. We'll call this WSL Ubuntu, and it's Linux 64. And my port is 127.0.0.1. Set the password and hit test. Connection succeeded. And now I'll go to SDK Manager and I'll add a new SDK for Linux. And it automatically detected what version of Linux it was. And I've done this before. I just cleaned it up to record the video. But normally you won't get that message that says it already exists. Now, one note about this is that with Apple, when compiling for iOS or macOS, you do need to be connected to a Mac to do the compilation. Whereas once you've done this import, you actually don't need to be connected to Linux anymore to do the compilation, to build your application. So you could, in theory, copy the SDK folder to a different computer along with the settings from the registry. And then that computer never actually has to connect to a Linux computer and it could still build. But then you'd copy your built program from that Linux computer or that Windows computer to the Linux computer and run it. And we're done. So we'll start with a simple console application here. And we'll set my target. Oops, come over here to target platform, add platform, Linux, and run this. Of course, I have to save because I have set up automatically save because even when I'm doing demos, it's like, it's not worth it. Lost my code too many times. Hello, WSL2. So it ran right there. And it runs it from within the PA server. So you can actually see the output down here. There we go. I can see it in my events. That's where it was. So I go view events. That's what I was looking for. Hello, WSL2. So I can see the output there. Now, if I want to run this program from Linux, I can come in here and I've created a folder when the script runs. So I go cd pa server, scratch, and you see there's folder based on the profile name that I set up in Delphi. So I just, and there's project 8, and I just run project 8 again, hello WSL2. So let's create a GUI application now. New multi-device application with Delphi. So first I'll run this on Windows, which of course I have to save. And it all works. Oh, but I need a style book on here. What was I thinking? And I want to use the Linux Ubuntu style right here because I'm running on Ubuntu. Of course, I'm pronouncing it inconsistently, but that's okay. Ooh, beautiful. Love it. So now we just come here and specify that I want Linux as my target platform, and we run it on Linux. Now, the very first GUI application you run on WSL will take a few seconds to pop up. So you'll see here it's taking a couple seconds to pop up, but there it is. It looks beautiful. Hello. But if I launch the second time, we'll see it pops up immediately. And if I go in here to, I'll just open a new Ubuntu instance. And run project 9, see it pops up again immediately. But if I'll go ahead and close these two down. So you see I closed it, and because it was launched, actually, why did it close that? I shouldn't have closed it. If I do WSL shutdown, then that will terminate the WSL instance. And then if I launch it again, see it takes a few seconds. It's actually bringing the instance back online. And if I go into project 9 and run project 9 again, you see again, it'll take a few seconds. So this is the very first time. Once the WSL instance comes online, it takes a few seconds to launch the GUI application. There we go. Now, if I want to terminate, so this is, let's take a look at this here. I'm going to bring up Process Explorer. Now, this is in Windows Terminal, but this is running on Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection. So it's actually making a remote desktop connection just for that one window there. If I want to terminate it, it's not visible in Task Manager, but I can terminate it from. So if I just do PS and open a new window up, I'm not going to see it. But if I do PS A, then I see all of them. And there's project 9 right there. So I can just say kill 34 and terminate it. So that's how you can terminate it. That's how where it's being run from a task manager point of view. So if your application hangs, now you know how to terminate it. If you want a different Linux distribution, you can use the WSL command line, and you can say list online, and that'll list all the distributions that are available online. Now, if I say WSL-L, that'll list the local distributions. And you'll notice I have some listed here that aren't available online. So online is not just the ones that are Windows Store. These are I guess, the official ones from Microsoft that they've collaborated with on. But some of these, like they're in the Windows Store, for example, Fedora Mix was the one that is a purchase through the Microsoft Store. So these are the free ones through Microsoft Store, I guess. But anyway, let's look at how you can install additional Linux distros beyond the ones that are in the Windows Store. There is a GitHub repository here, WSLDL, which lets you build your own Linux distributions. So they have screenshots of Arch, Alpine, and CentOS. But if you go to the documentation here, it lists a number of distributions that people have already built, and it goes through how to make your own distribution. So I'm going to install Elementary OS, which is available right here, and I've already downloaded it, and I'll walk you through the process. So I've got a folder on my C drive called WSL, and I'll make a new one here. New folder, WSL. Oh, sorry, Elementary. And in this folder, I'm going to extract the contents of this zip. So the two files that are in here, the root fs.tar.gz is the actual Elementary OS Linux distro. This is the WSLDL renamed to elementary.exe. So whatever you call that is what's going to be the name of the distribution. So now I just run elementary.exe, and that's going to install it. Now it's creating a hard disk image here, you can see, and installation is complete. And so now I actually have to run it again. Oh, it didn't prompt me for a password. So sometimes you run it a second time, it'll prompt you for a username and password. Create a username and password, but this time it didn't. So right now you'll see it's here, but it doesn't have one of the cool icons. So I'm going to go in here and give it a cool icon. Just going to come in here and select elementary and browse for icon. And I have my icons here. I'm going to move them into the little folder so they're the same place the rest of them are. So the elementary OS icon is that one, although I might change it. I want a more colorful version of it. And I love the vintage color scheme and elementary OS background. Let's go take a look at that. It's a little, doesn't stand out very well. So I'm going to change that background image opacity, make it a little darker. There we go. That looks better. You can customize it further. You can go with the acrylic, which gives it that kind of transparency, makes it semi-transparent so you can see through to the background. A lot of other customizations you can do. Oh, I do like coming down and specifying I want bold fonts with bright colors. And hit save. And so now I can come in here and go elementary OS. And there we go. I've installed a new Linux distribution for WSL. Now, there's quite a few I showed you there. I guess I don't need that guy anymore. There's quite a few available here, or you can make your own. Or let's say, for example, you want to have Fedora, but you want a slightly different variation on Fedora. You can do that, or you can have multiple Fedora instances, etc., just by renaming it. I'm going to go ahead and run the installation on Penguin Enterprise 7, which is supposed to be based on CentOS. Takes a second for it to start up first time. Neo fetch. This is reporting Scientific Linux 7.9, which I'm not familiar with, but it is using the Yum package manager, so therefore this should work. Let's see. Might need to debug my script. All right, let's try this again. All right, there we go. I will update the script. But that's installing all the development tool package necessary for Delphi to import the SDK. So this looks good so far. I don't know why it does that at the end. That's really weird. It gets to the end where it'll fix that as well. Oh, all right. Launching PA server. I'll change that so it doesn't launch PA server. But I can just launch PA server manually. It's because it's being launched within the script, I guess. Doesn't like that. Now, let's go into Delphi and edit SDK. Add a new one here. Interesting. So my connection's the same because I'm not running Ubuntu anymore. It's using the same connection, but now it's importing it with Scientific Linux 7.9. And it's going into the folder Scientific 7.9. So that'll take a few minutes to run. All right, and it's finished. Save. And so now we'll go ahead and run this GUI application on there. Still using the Ubuntu theme, but I don't have a Red Hat one. Still looks beautiful. Again, because it's the first time running a GUI application, it's going to take a second. Oh, I don't have GTK3 installed. Let me fix that. Okay, I won't read the docs real quick. I think all I have to do is say sudo yum install GTK3. Yes, I will update the script with that as well, assuming that fixes it. Hopefully that fixes it. Okay, let's try it again. Oh, I don't have PA server running. There we go. All right, now no errors. All right, there we go. Just took a minute. Hello, Red Hat. Well, not actually Red Hat, but anyway, there you go. Now it's running on CentOS based. What's it called? It's the Penguin Enterprise 7. I do have another demo of setting up and configuring CentOS with a custom installation. So if you're not familiar, Fedora is the base open source project that's managed by Red Hat in the community with focus on features, whereas Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the commercial product built on Fedora. So Red Hat takes and adds things onto it. And then CentOS is the open source version of that. So CentOS basically takes Red Hat and removes the official commercial support from it. So I'll show you how to do a manual installation of CentOS Stream 9, which following Microsoft's documentation here. CentOS 8 was end of life at the end of the year. I'll put the details in how to do this. You have to start from Ubuntu. I'm following Microsoft's official guide for installing CentOS. You have to start by installing Docker because you pull a Docker image for this. So I've already got Docker installed. And now I start the Docker service. And it's a good idea to make sure you don't have, this isn't in the guide, but make sure you don't already have an image running, because if you have multiple images running, then the script won't work. So now I want to start the Docker image for CentOS Stream 9, which right there did that. Now I've already got it installed on mine. Otherwise, it would give you a message saying, oh, it's not found locally, downloading, and take a couple seconds. Now I got to extract the Docker container ID for that, which we can see here is right there. If I had multiple containers by the same name running, then I would have two IDs there and the next command would fail, which is where I'm going to extract the, tarball from there. Now I've already got a folder set up to receive this into right here. So I just copied that file out. And now I want to remove that container that's running. Otherwise, I just have a container in the background. There we go, I've removed it. Now from PowerShell, I have to go into the folder, which I'm already there, and I just tell WSL to import that tar. Apparently, I don't know why I have that existing already. So unregister. So there we go. Now it should work. And now if I go back into the folder, it's created the file system for that. Sometimes that doesn't update right away. If it doesn't, you just have to give it a second. It takes a while for that to update. I'm not sure what that is. So I have to finish setting CentOS up now. And to do that, I need to install. Apparently, it doesn't have sudo or password, the ability to change the user's password installed by default. So I have to install those real quick. And then I'm going to create a user for myself, which that's just a local variable for that. And then I want to add the user to sudoers, or actually, yeah, add the user to sudoers. And then this sets it up as the default username for WSL, and then finally set my password. Yes, I know that password is weak, but it's okay. It's a local password. And now I need to actually close this and in PowerShell terminate it. So if I go look at list of running ones here, CentOS is running. I have to terminate CentOS because it won't take effect. And so now I can go in here and launch CentOS again. And you'll see now it's running as Jim. And now I can run the setup script to set it up for Delphi. That looked like an error. Oh, I know what the problem is. I'll fix the script for that. I keep discovering things in the script that need to be fixed. So this command here did not run, potentially. Make sure it runs. Oh, it didn't run, so. The script is now updated though. Okay, so now I can run. Why did it give me an error message? That's weird. Oh, PS. Computers are really picky about that spelling. The reason I set up, by the way, a shell script there is so that you can default your password in there. So now I can come in here. It's still pointing to, it says Scientific Linux, but it's pointing to the right folder. So it's pointing to that instance. Now I'm getting some warnings here, or actually this is errors, but it still runs the application. And there we go. And it always runs slower the first time. It has to start up all the stuff for running. See, it starts immediately there after that. But it has to start up all the background services for the GUI applications on WSL2. Here are some official Microsoft resources for Windows Subsystem for Linux. The command line blog covers WSL as well as the terminal, so you can check there for updates. There's the Learn WSL and the WSL docs. WSL docs actually goes into installation as well as WSLG. There's a blog post there about you connecting USB devices into WSL, which is very useful. It also links to an open source project that you can use for that. And then there's a few YouTube videos for you there from Microsoft. The first one is an intro to WSLG, which is mostly what we've covered here, but there may be some things there, or if you just want a quick refresher. The second one is a deep dive into WSL2 from build when they released WSL2. It's a full hour long. So if you want to get a lot more details on WSL2, check that one out. And the third is their most recent update on some updates to WSL and Windows Terminal. These are some unofficial resources for WSL. The first one is the advanced WSL launcher, which you can use for making custom WSL distros. If you go to Microsoft's official documentation, they do have an official guide for this, but this is a launcher that simplifies the process for you. And in their docs there, they actually have a list of a number of other distros that have been made. Some of the ones were the ones I had installed as well. Then there's a collection of WSL utilities and a GUI for managing it, which you see a screenshot for here. Makes it easy to manage your distros. And lastly, there is the awesome list for WSL, which is just a collection of links and details and utilities for WSL. And here are some Fmx Linux resources. First, there's the doc wiki on getting started with Linux application development, installing a platform assist server, and details on Fmx Linux. Then there is those two scripts I have for working with or setting up Ubuntu and Redhat for development with Delphi 11 Alexandria. And with that, Q&A, but a reminder, there's the link there at the bottom that goes to the blog post where the replay will be posted, all the slides, links, and more. So I've been answering the questions in the question panel. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the question panel. I will address a few things here. I was showing Delphi Linux, or Delphi, because C++ Builder doesn't have a Linux target yet. Unfortunately, that's the case. And it does not work with Community Edition. Linux is only available under Enterprise, Delphi Enterprise. So not Professional or Community Edition. As far as the difference between Windows 10 and Windows 11, they're about 90% the same. If you're on Windows 10, you might need to be on a insider preview, like the release, or I think it's the beta cycle. It's the most. You don't have to be on like the early cycle, but there's 3 different cycles. If you're on the most stable cycle, then you probably should have this available to you there. There's just some slightly different steps. If you look at the link to the installation I included in the slides from Microsoft, you will find details on how to set up on Windows 10. But once you get set up, it's all going to be about the same. So WSL2, so there's WSL, WSL2, and WSLG. WSL2 is the new version of WSL, and you can actually run the two side by side. So WSL2 doesn't completely replace WSL. WSLG is included in the latest WSL. As far as installing on a different drive, in the CentOS example, I showed installing it on my C drive there, but I was explicitly specifying a path, so you could specify a different path if you wanted to run it off a different drive. So when it showed the folder that I was creating the virtual drive on, the drive image, that was on my C drive, but I could just as easily put that on my D, E, F, or whatever drive. I would not recommend putting it on a Linux drive, or not a Linux drive, on a network drive. I just found local drives tend to be faster. It is creating a native ELF64 Intel app file program that is running on Linux. It is actually running in Linux. The PA server just handles the deployment. Once you've created that, you could give it to anybody else that has a Linux installation. As far as comparing it to Docker, you can do quite a bit with Docker, and Docker is certainly another option. If you're wanting to run Docker under Linux, then you have to have a Linux install, which would be WSL. And if you already have WSL installed, then it's easier just to use that WSL to have to install full Docker there. The theme can be adjusted between OSs when the application runs. I didn't really get into that. I think I've covered it before in the past. It's also in the doc wiki. So as far as hardware specifications on my machine, I can bring it up here and show you. Actually, I just showed it at one point. It's a 3.6 gigahertz i7 11th gen. It's a 1170. I'll put the CPU here in the chat. And I have a 1660 Ti GPU, but I don't think the GPU gets into it as much. And I am running NVIDIA or an NVMe SSD. If you're not running an NVMe SSD, you really should. And I have 32 gigabytes of RAM, but it's really not using all that RAM. It's using very little RAM, to be honest. The overhead's really low with this, is what's really low about it. Question Elliot's asking, excellent session. What is the best preferred way to run Linux on Windows now? WSL, man. If you're wanting to run Linux now, if you need a full Linux desktop experience, then you can use a virtual machine like Hyper-V. Otherwise, if you're just wanting to run Linux GUI applications, I mean, you could spawn up a full GUI from this as well, I guess, but 90% of the time, I would say WSL2 is the way to go with running Linux on Windows. Can we use a real Linux system installed on physical? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So you can install PA server on any Linux machine, even a Linux machine in the cloud, actual hardware, or a virtual machine or whatever, and run it deploy to it from there, just like I was showing. I was more focused today on WSL, but this so totally works with any Linux, with any 64-bit Intel Linux. So it doesn't work on like a ARM Linux. Does this work on Windows 11 ARM running in Parallels virtual machine on a Mac Mini? WSL does not currently work inside Parallels on the ARM Mac Mini. That's a limitation of Parallels. It has to do with nested virtualization. That's something that Parallels is working on, but until Parallels gets that fixed, you can't. It's not an option. Now, if you have a separate machine that is running Linux on hardware, then you could connect to that remotely. So you cannot run WSL on Windows in a Parallels virtual machine under ARM macOS. But you can run Delphi in there and connect to a remote machine that has Linux installed on it. Matthias is saying that Delphi for Linux is pretty amazing and not getting enough publicity. I feel so glad to see this webinar. Our company uses it for a large server console application, but the GUI possibilities with Fmx Linux are really cool. I agree. I think it's really great. It doesn't get enough attention. So Dieter's saying, shouldn't it be called the Linux subsystem for Windows? You know, I mess up and do call it that sometimes. It does seem like like that would be a better name, but in which performance is better, a virtual machine or WSL? WSL is better performance-wise. Richard's saying it would be great to have a IDE on Linux and Mac. It would be. It's something I would like to see as well. Actually, we have the Idera has acquired UltraEdit, and so I've been talking with the UltraEdit product manager about what would be the possibilities of integrating some of the features from Delphi into UltraEdit. So maybe, I don't know. Who knows? Certainly not something that is planned at this point. Just something that's been debated. I've been suggesting coming up with ways to do Linux or a Delphi IDE on Linux and macOS as well. I think it'd be great. The Delphi IDE is very very complex program, as I'm sure you understand. So porting all the functionality to a whole new OS is quite an undertaking. But maybe there could be a light version. The question here is, does this work on professional Delphi? No, it only works on enterprise Delphi. And is WSL working on the version of Windows before Windows 10? No, WSL was only introduced in Windows 10. It is not available on Windows 8.1. If you're on Windows 8.1, you would need to create a Windows or a Linux virtual machine, which you could then install PA Server on and deploy from Delphi that way. So the comment here that if WSL2 makes the latest VirtualBox super slow if installed on the same Windows host, there's a bug report on it, VirtualBox. Okay, so that's interesting. I have not used the latest VirtualBox with the same machine. Is it possible to create an installation media under Linux apps with all the required libs to create an RPM or deb from Brad Studio? There is not a feature built into Rad Studio for that, but you could. There are other utilities out there for that would allow you to create a full install. So, for example, the scripts that I wrote that are available on GitHub Gist you could modify those scripts those scripts have more than you need because they're installing PA Server and some of the development libraries, but you could modify the script to install the required packages that were needed for your application, and you could do that. Or there's depending on the Linux platform, there's different package systems that you could install your install your application that way as well. So there are solutions for that. There's just not one built into Delphi that bundles that all up for you. Is it possible to run Delphi project on any native Linux distro? In theory, I've tested on dozens of native Linux distros and dozens of virtual machines and dozens of WSL instances, maybe not quite dozens of WSL instances, quite a few WSL instances. And you can get it running on, I've got it running on all of them, even like some oddballs like Puppy Linux and stuff like that. It is a matter of, you have to understand the distro you're using and know how to install the required libraries, right? So if you're running a Delphi GUI application on Linux, you need GTK3 on it. And if you do not know how to install GTK3 on whatever version of Linux you're using, then you can't run a Delphi application on it. And if you don't know how to install GTK3, you probably shouldn't be using that distro of Linux. So as long as you're able to install GTK3, and there may be a couple other libraries that are required, I'm not sure what they are offhand, then you should be able to get a Delphi application running on it. Should be being the keyword. Like I said, I've been able, I'm trying to think if there's any that I've not been able to do. I think there's been a couple that were just really complicated, but I tried a different variation of it and got it to work. So I would think that if I knew the distro better, I could probably have better luck at it. Claude saying I wrote a point of sale software running on both target Windows and Linux thanks to Delphi. Great job. Fantastic. That's great to hear. The one thing I will say that I love is that I can write my application and prototype it on Windows, as you saw I showed it running on Windows, and then say, okay, now let's deploy it to Linux. Now let's deploy it to Mac OS. Now let's deploy it to iOS. Let's deploy it to Android. And you can test it on all those platforms. But you can prototype, get the bulk of the layout, stuff like that on Windows really quickly and easily without needing those other platforms. Okay, I think that's it. I don't see any more questions coming in for right now. Thank you for joining, and I will see you all online later. And we'll get the blog post posted, hopefully, like I said, later today. Bye, everybody.